Bereavement is parental bereavement, and I know firsthand of this pain after losing my baby girl Millie at just 6 days old. With no indication of complication prior to her birth, it came as a complete shock. We never got to see her eyes, we never got to hear her cry. As the weeks passed and we were riding the tsunami of grief, those around us expressed how useless they felt. They too didn't know that we felt so useless. We didn't even know what we needed. But I knew at that point that I needed to speak out. From Millie's life and death, this podcast was birthed. Little Life, Big Loss. As a safe space to talk about baby loss, grief, trauma, heartache, and hope. A safe space for lost parents to share their stories of their real-life angels. A place for our nearest and dearest to learn about our journeys and to gain a deeper understanding in how to help those who are riding the tsunami of grief. Welcome to Little Life, Big Loss. Hi there, Millie's mum here. My name is Rochelle and I am the creator and host for this podcast, Little Life, Big Loss. Whilst I hadn't planned on adding trigger warnings to the podcast, because let's be honest, our whole life and this whole podcast is one big trigger, I would like to preface a few things. Every episode I record could include any of the following: birth trauma, stillbirth, neonatal loss, termination for medical reasons, mental health, suicide, grief, and all things in and around all of this. Episodes might also mention living children, pregnancy, and pregnancy after loss. Please read the caption for a summary of what you can expect in this episode. The opinions shared by guests on my podcast are the opinions of those individuals and do not always reflect the same opinions of mine. We are not professionals, we are just lost parents sharing our story. If you hear of something that you wish to try for yourself, please seek professional guidance from a psychologist, a GP, or an OB. And finally, thank you for all the love and support that we have been receiving. I'm in love with this safe space that we have created for our babies to be spoken about in such real and raw detail. If you feel connected to an episode, please share it with someone that you think it might help. And if you would like to help our community, we have created a PayPal account, and we are asking that each time you listen to an episode, you just donate $1. If you go to PayPal and you search Little Life, Big Loss, any donations to that account will help us do so much more in this space. Thank you again so much. Welcome to Little Life, Big Loss. We have the beautiful Karina with us this morning. And we were just on a roll. We were chatting about all things 11:11 and signs from our babies and all these things. I was like, wait, we've got to press record because this is amazing. And it always happens. We start chatting too much. But thank you so much for sending me through an email the other day, sharing your story. All of the stories get me, but the other day I messaged Karina back and I was like, your stories just floored me. So thank you for being brave and coming on and sharing. And we were just talking about how Karina just wants her story to be perfect for Raf. And I just said, he's going to help you share all the right things in all the right ways. So as you know, I know you've listened to some of the episodes. Tell me, who was Karina before she experienced baby loss?
Oh, gosh, it's such a big question, isn't it? And I've had plenty of time to think about it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Karina before baby loss was the eternal optimist. Like, I was such a glass half full person. It would drive my husband insane. Like, he would sometimes be like, Karina, we need to tone down the toxic positivity. Like, I'm down in dumps and I just want to stay here. I was so positive and so optimistic about everything. I guess I'd lived a pretty privileged life. I mean, I'd had beautiful parents who loved me and a really beautiful childhood. I had been able to do all of the things I wanted to. I spent a long time at university. I lived overseas in my 20s for a little bit. I'd say I'd had an incredible amount of privilege. And so that's what gave me this really big, optimistic view on life and on the world. And I hadn't really experienced any hardship. I mean, other than having my heart broken by a few boys and my parents separating when I was 23 or 24, that was kind of the worst thing that had ever happened to me. So yeah, I'd led a really big and a really beautiful and lucky life, I'll say.
How lovely. How lovely.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
I 100%. I'm so grateful for that because like what an incredible position to be in. Not many people can actually say that at the age of 30, 31, they had done all the things they wanted to do. And I, especially in my career as well, I'd set some really specific goals for myself and I'd achieved them. And
Wow.
I was ready to become a mum, you know? I was so ready for it.
And so let's talk about the journey to becoming a mum.
Yeah, it started a really long time ago, even before my husband and I met.
Hmm.
So my husband Evan, just before he turned 19, he was diagnosed with stage 4 testicular cancer.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and it was they had caught it so late that they didn't actually think he was going to survive. The doctors basically said to him or to his parents, take him home. He's got maybe a couple of weeks. So at that time, obviously not knowing that he would even survive, fertility preservation, it was talked about and it was kind of pursued it was pursued, but it wasn't successful because he was already so sick.
Shit.
So yeah, so he incredibly survived that. He was really sick for a good few years there, but he survived.
How did
And
he know how, like, what was his symptoms and stuff leading up to getting the diagnosis?
yeah, so he had a lump in his testicles for maybe, oh, I should have checked this with him beforehand. I think it was like 2 or even 3 years, and he didn't tell anyone about it.
Oh.
He saw it, felt it, it was growing, but he just was so embarrassed about it. And so by the time it was caught, his cancer had spread, and yeah, the prognosis was not good at all.
And I guess he probably thought, I'm going to take that light away, it is annoying. I guess he probably thought that, he's not going to have cancer. He's 19,
Oh,
Who at
it's
19
one of
thinks that
those
that
things.
lump is going to be cancer?
Yeah, hindsight is such a beautiful thing, right? And now, as an adult, since being on the other side of that, he's so passionate about men's health and being able to talk openly about things that are kind of embarrassing and a bit awkward. And it's something that we were really looking forward to with our kids as well, is having an open relationship with them
Mm,
where they could say anything to us and not feel embarrassed
yeah.
about it. Um, so yeah, our story kind of starts there, I suppose. And this was 20 or 25 years ago now. So Ev became infertile right at the beginning of his adult life. So when we met about 6 years ago now, he was really open about that with me. I think we even spoke about it on our first date, having kids, and is that something that we both wanted? And I knew that I really wanted to be a mum, and he wanted to be a dad in whatever way he could, and so it was always open. It
Mm,
was never like there was never any doubt. We knew that if we wanted to be parents, we would have to go through the IVF route and we would have to use a sperm donor.
wow.
So we started our IVF journey just after we got married. So we got married in March 2022.
Hmm.
And then it was maybe 6 months after that we started just kind of collecting information. Um, so we started out at a bulk build fertility clinic, and we had a couple of meetings there. We talked about what becoming parents was going to look like for us. And at that stage in the public system, there were actually no sperm donors at all, like none. Um, and we knew that we didn't want to use, or we didn't want to ask a family member of Evans. We
Yeah.
wanted to choose someone anonymously. And yeah, there wasn't a single one, let alone having any choice. So we were kind of forced to go privately, and we moved to a private clinic here in Sydney. Um, and we 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 started looking for a donor, and I don't know if you know much about this, but in the private fertility clinics, there are all of these apps for sperm donors, and it's literally like Tinder for sperm. And so you swipe through, there's a profile for each donor. Some of them have little baby photos of the donors, and some of them don't have photos at all, but they have like a short little bio. And then if you swipe yes on them, you get a full medical history, so you can see like all about them. It's kind of weird, but really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we started swiping through the sperm donor Tinder, and we found one that we really liked. We were trying to be fussy. We wanted someone that was tall and was of Greek background, like my husband Evan is, and we couldn't find anyone that fit those really kind of simple parameters. I guess there was no one in the app at all. So it took us like probably a couple of months of swiping through, and there were new people coming in all the time. And finally we found someone. So there was this guy, and I remember so clearly, I was on the bus one day reading his profile, and he was of Greek background like Evan is. His mum had been born in Egypt like Evan's mum had. He described himself as loud, outgoing, stubborn, and like this is basically describing my husband. Like all of these attributes are him. And so I was like, okay, this is our guy. We have to have him.
Yeah.
And so we swiped yes, and it turned out that he was based in Victoria, and the laws around like fertility treatment and the transfer of like biological products interstate are really strict.
Okay.
So if you donate sperm or eggs in Victoria, they have to stay there. And so because we wanted to use that donor, we had to travel to Victoria to access the sperm. This is jumping ahead a little bit, but we were able to create some embryos in our first round of IVF, and they have to stay in Victoria, even though it's my, it was my egg that created these embryos. It's so archaic. It's only Victoria that does that. The other states are much more lax. So anyway, it meant that we had to get all of our fertility treatment in Victoria, which was, it was more difficult than we expected, I guess, but we were lucky in that we could do it. We were able to afford to go there for the egg retrieval. We were able to go again for the embryo transfer a little bit later. I guess we're really fortunate in that we could do that.
Yeah.
So we were able to choose that donor, and then in January 2023 I did the egg retrieval procedure. And that was another thing prior to all this. So we now had to move to a third fertility clinic in Victoria to get our treatment down there. And when you use donor sperm or donor eggs, you have to get at least 2 sessions of counselling.
Yeah.
And we had done those 2 sessions of counselling in New South Wales, but now because we were with a Victorian clinic, we had to do 2 more sessions with a Victorian counsellor. It just, oh my God, it was so
like to prove that you were in the right space to be taking
Correct.
on yeah
to basically prove that we knew what we were getting into, that we would be like responsible parents, I suppose. And it really sucks because no one else has to do that, right? Like no other parent has to do that. And when you are choosing to go through IVF, I would hazard a guess that most people know how serious this is, and that no one does this lightly, right? Like it's so expensive and it's so taxing on your body. No one's just doing it like as a fun thing to do on the weekend. So the fact that you have to do all of this counselling, I already kind of disagree with. So then the fact that we had to do more counselling, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So anyway, we got through all of those hurdles. We did an egg retrieval procedure, and we were lucky enough to get 3 embryos, which was really exciting. So that was in January last year. And then we decided we wanted to have a little bit of time between the egg retrieval and when we did an embryo transfer. So we came back to Sydney and I went back to work and kind of carried on with life for a little bit. And then in April, so it was 4 months later, we decided to go down to Melbourne and do the embryo transfer. And on the 21st of April, we did our first transfer.
Mm-hmm.
And the embryo looked really good. It was like hatching out of its shell, which apparently is a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did it, and we were cautiously optimistic. We had really been managing our own expectations. We kind of thought, well, this is our first round. We know that IVF success rates are so varied and there's so much that's unknown. So we were like, let's just see how it goes. And that very first embryo stuck, and that was Rafael. So
Cautiously
yeah.
optimistic. I love that.
Yeah, someone told me that like early on when we were doing, it might have even been our fertility specialist when we were doing that embryo transfer, because you've got to be hopeful, but you also have to be realistic as well. And we know so much about fertility medicine, and fertility science, but there's also so much that's just completely random as well. So yeah, we did that on the 21st of April.
First
The
round,
very
first
first
embryo. Yeah.
Yeah, which felt kind of too good to be true. I waited, I think, 8 days after the embryo transfer, and then I couldn't wait any longer and peed on the stick, and it was very positive.
Oh,
So yeah, we were so excited.
which for people who are not in the IVF world, they say, don't pee on a stick, wait for the blood test. You get a blood test, I think, 11 days after a transfer. Is that right?
Correct.
But
Yeah.
most people pee on a stick within about a week, and then it's like the head fuck of like,
Oh God.
negative. I don't know. Oh, it's so hard.
It is like the longest 11 days of your life. It is, and of course you're hyper vigilant. So any little change in your body, you're like, oh, is that something? Maybe I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
And I remember I didn't really feel much at all. And so I was convinced that it hadn't worked.
Wow.
And we got to day 8 and I was like, Ev, I need to do this for my sanity. I need to pee on the stick. And he's like, all right, but we can't be super confident in what the result is. But I did it day 8, day 9, day 10, and it was getting more and more positive.
It's so good.
Yeah. So yeah, we were off to a really good start, I suppose. We still, in the early days, I was still really cautious. I knew how common miscarriage was or is, I suppose. And just because we did IVF, it didn't give us any protection against having a miscarriage. So yeah, I was pretty cautious, but also just like so excited. So I wanted to tell everyone, and it was so hard to keep it a secret. But yeah, so we kind of progressed through the early stages of pregnancy pretty normally. I didn't have too many symptoms. I had a little bit of nausea, but it was manageable. Again, I was incredibly lucky. I know that you were really sick with Millie.
Yeah.
And so many of my girlfriends have just had the worst like not even morning sickness, all day sickness.
Any time of day.
Oh God, I can't even imagine.
I can't imagine not being sick. I'm like, how did you know you were pregnant? To me, that's the sign.
That is a very fair point. Yeah. I remember in the first trimester being really tired more than anything else. Like I had a bit of nausea, especially in the car. But I was just so tired. Like I would come home from work and I'd have to have a little nap on the sofa before I made dinner. And actually probably the first trimester was the hardest just because of the fatigue. Yeah. So everything was progressing really well. Like I went to all of my scans and everything was fine. At the 12-week mark, I was diagnosed as high risk for preeclampsia.
Okay.
So apparently it's genetic. My mum had it with me. She actually developed preeclampsia. So they put me on a low dose of aspirin at the 12-week mark
Okay.
to manage that.
Remind me
And
what preeclampsia is.
so it's high blood pressure as a result of pregnancy. I think it's caused by the placenta itself. Don't fact check me on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pregnancy induced high blood pressure. And it can develop at any stage of your pregnancy or even after you give birth, which is kind of crazy. Um, but yeah, they put me on the aspirin, and my blood pressure was fine the whole way through, even at 36 weeks when they take you off aspirin in case you need to have a C-section. My blood pressure was fine.
Okay.
So yeah, that was kind of the only weird thing, I suppose. But everything was totally fine. I planned to go through the public hospital through the midwifery group practice,
Yeah.
which I did, and I did kind of shared care with my GP as well.
And this was all back in Sydney? You didn't have to...
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were
Thank
allowed to
God.
leave Victoria?
Once I got a positive pregnancy test, the fertility clinic were like, okay, you're good. You can do your own thing now. Which, for a first time mum, I was also like, well, what do I do? Like, what happens now that I've done a pregnancy test? Like,
Yeah.
do I see someone? Like,
Yeah.
I had
They're like,
no
off you
idea.
go. You're good now. That's your sperm
Yeah.
now.
I remember asking, like, so will you give me like a form to get my 6-week scan? And they were like, oh no, you need to go and see your OB or your GP for that. And I was like, oh,
Who is my
okay.
OB though? You're like, I don't even know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I had no freaking idea. So yeah, thankfully we were back in Sydney and doing everything here. So yeah, I progressed through my first trimester. It was fine. Second trimester, like everything was perfect. Every scan that I had, Rafi was smack bang in the middle of average for his growth, for his gestational age. There was one kind of weird moment where they discovered quite late that I had a 2-vessel cord. So I think a normal umbilical cord has 2 arteries and 1 vein, I think. But I only had 1 artery and 1 vein. But I remember speaking to the midwife about it, and she was like, look, it's only really a problem if the baby's not growing well. But because Rafi is growing perfectly well, I don't think we need to be too concerned about it. And it was picked up really late as well. Usually it's picked up at either, I think, your 12-week or your 20-week scan. But it wasn't picked up for me until I was like 30 weeks, I think. So that was a little bit weird, but we weren't super concerned about it because he was hitting all of the milestones that he needed to. And I loved being pregnant. I felt like my best self. I loved like how nice people are to you as well. I remember once getting the bus to work and I was running late and the bus had already pulled out from the bus stop, and the bus driver saw me coming, and so he pulled back in, pulled over and opened the doors for me, and I was like, oh, thank you.
You're like, if I was not pregnant, that would not have happened.
Totally. Oh my gosh, like he would have just pretended to not see me if I wasn't pregnant. Yeah, I really loved it, and I found pregnancy really, I dare say, easy. I look back now and I remember I said a couple of times, like, it seems too good to be true. Whenever I saw my GP, she was like, yep, everything's fine. You're perfectly average. The baby's average. And we kind of had a little laugh that when you're pregnant, it's the only time in your life that you really want to be like average and normal and for nothing to be like special or extra. So yeah, like I loved it. I had a little bit of a funny moment when I did the gestational diabetes test. I couldn't tolerate it, and so there was like projectile vomit happening. It was a whole thing.
I was so scared of that happening because I'd literally vomited every other minute of every other day, and then for that I was fine. I'd worked myself up thinking this is going to be the worst thing ever, and I was like, oh, that was nothing. Isn't that so
Oh,
weird?
far out. That is weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I reckon I maybe had vomited once throughout my pregnancy to date, and then I had to do the test. I couldn't complete it the first time because I was vomiting so much, and then like went out onto the street and projectile vomited into the street in the middle of like the city. It was really bad. But yeah, that was the only kind of unfortunate pregnancy symptom that I had.
Hilarious. Yep, no, I remember completing it going like, "I don't know what everyone's complaining about, that was fine."
Yeah, wow, there you go. I think I've now freaked out all of my friends. Like, a close girlfriend of mine is pregnant and she was getting the test done 2 weeks ago. And she was like, I'm so worried about vomiting. I really don't want to. And I was like, I'm so sorry that I have scarred you like
Yeah,
this.
literally.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh. So
So yeah, so pregnancy was great. I loved it. I finished work at, I think I was just shy of 36 weeks.
yeah,
And it was like just a couple of weeks before Christmas. Rafi's due date was the 7th of January.
yeah.
So I thought, great, I will have a little bit of time to kind of wind down from work. I will, do all of my nesting things. I'll do some self-care. And for some reason, we were convinced that he was going to come early. I don't know why, but me, my husband, my mum, my whole family, we all thought that he was going to come early. No medical professional actually said that to us. So I don't know how we got this idea in our heads. Um, so yeah, I was prepared for the fact that he might come early. And everything was fine. Like, I was going to more regular midwife appointments towards the end. I had a scan at about 38 weeks because it seemed like he had changed position. So he'd been head down already, like in the last few weeks. And then the midwife said to me, oh, I'm not sure if he's still actually head down. I can't, like, she was feeling my belly and she said, I can't quite tell. And she'd also thought that my fundal height hadn't changed. So she was a bit worried that something was going on with his
Mm.
growth. And so she was like, oh, would you mind just going for an extra scan today? And I was like, oh, okay. Thinking, well, if she wants it to be today, this can't be good.
Mm.
We can do it. The sonographer can do it in an hour or so. So just go and wait in the waiting room at the hospital. And I was like, okay, sure. And Evan was with me, and we were both trying to just not overthink it and be calm, or be as calm as we could. And I remember going in to the sonographer, or the room where you have the scan. And the sonographer was like kind of annoyed. They were really busy that day. And I think they'd had to push me in between other patients. And she put the thing on my belly, and she could see the baby straight away, and she could see that he was in the same position, and she looked at his growth compared to the most recent scan that I had, and she was like, yep, everything's fine. And like, obviously we were relieved, but
Yeah,
yeah, I very distinctly remember her being like, oh,
like
she didn't
that.
say it, but I got the impression that she was like, oh, these midwives, they're too cautious. Um, so yeah, that was kind of weird, I
Yeah,
guess.
like, would it yeah, you'd rather be safe than
Yeah,
sorry, right?
yeah,
Sometimes I think there's
yeah,
a lot of sonographers that shouldn't be in their roles.
yeah. I feel like I guess because there was no other sign to say that anything was wrong, like, I can understand her frustration.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, look at, again, hindsight is a beautiful thing. Looking back now, I'm like, well, did she actually do the scan
Mm.
that well?
Mhm.
Is there something that was that the first sign that something was wrong?
Wow.
Your mind plays all of these tricks on you, right?
Mhm.
So
Did
yeah, that
they
was
did
a
they, check the vessel or the cord again at any point, or
no, no. So they don't, once they've identified that there's a two vessel cord, I don't think they actually look at the cord itself too much.
Mm.
I think they just monitor the baby's growth to make sure that they're growing against, they're hitting all of the milestones that they should be. Which he was. Like, I
Mm.
think it was at that scan, actually, the sonographer could see that he was practicing his breathing. Like, she could see his diaphragm expanding and contracting. And she was like, oh, that's a really good sign. Babies only do that when they've got a lot of energy, because it takes them a lot of energy to, it's quite hard. It takes them a lot of energy to do that.
Okay.
And we were like, oh my God, he's practicing his breathing.
He's
He must be
amazing.
getting ready to come
Yeah.
out. Yeah. Yeah. I was like, that is my typical firstborn child, kicking all the goals,
Oh.
type A personality like me. Um, so yeah, that was a weird little scare, but everything was totally fine. So the due date of the 7th of January came and went without event. By that point, I was starting to get a bit sick of being pregnant. Actually, no, sorry. I was getting sick of people asking me, have you had the baby yet? Like, towards the end, in the last few days, I just had to put my phone in another room and ignore it. And it's probably my own fault, because I thought he was coming early, and I told the whole world that he was going to come early, because literally every single day, my friends and family would be like, oh, is he here? Have you had the baby? And I'd be like, no, I haven't had the baby yet.
I'm still pregnant.
I'm still pregnant. Yeah. I was trying to like make the most of those last few days, knowing that my life was about to change forever. Um, I went to the beach almost every day, and I actually, throughout my pregnancy, I felt Rafi moving the most when I was in the ocean. Like, when I would dive under a wave, that's when I would feel him like kicking around.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed, and by that point it was January, so it was really hot, and I was like just loving being at the beach and being in the water. Yeah, so the 7th of January came and went, and I had a midwife appointment. I think I was 40 weeks and 2 days. And I'd been doing all of the things to like naturally induce labor, the raspberry leaf tea and the dates and the curry. Like, I did everything, and there was no action happening. So I went to see the midwife, and she, did all of the usual checks. We heard his heartbeat. It was going perfectly. My blood pressure was fine. She did a sort of internal exam. She was going to try and do like a stretch and sweep to get labor going, but she couldn't. And she was like, that's okay. I can see that your cervix is starting to soften. It's not ready for a stretch and sweep just yet, but it looks like your body is starting to do all the right things to get ready for labor. And she said at that point, if you haven't gone into labor by so this was on a Tuesday, and she said, if you haven't gone into labor by next Monday, we will book you in for an induction. And I was like, okay, I really didn't want to be induced. I had heard so much about like the cascade of interventions. Once you've had one intervention to induce labor, you're more likely to need other things. And I really just wanted the rest of the pregnancy to be as natural as possible. So we went home after that appointment, and I remember saying to Ev, like, I really, this baby needs to come before then. I really don't want to be induced. And he was like, well, we're going to do what we can, and there's a lot that's out of our control here. So that was on the Tuesday. And the next few days passed. I started getting some more regular, like Braxton Hicks, but nothing too serious or too intense. And then on the Saturday morning, Evan and I went to the beach like early in the morning. I think we got there at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And so I was 40 weeks and 6 days at this point. Yeah. And we were swimming and just kind of hanging around. And the Braxton Hicks started really intensifying. Like, I was getting contractions maybe every 10 minutes and pretty regularly. So I said to Ev, I think we should go home. Like, I had started timing them on my phone at this point. I said, I think we should go home, and like, I'm just worried that this is now starting to progress, and I think we need to be at home and getting ourselves organized. And we both, we were so excited. We were like, oh my gosh, maybe today's the day, maybe he's coming. And we sent a selfie of us at the beach in our family group chat with Evan's family. And, you know, I'm wearing like my little bikini and I've got my belly out, and it's such a hard photo to look at now. Because we found out later that he had already passed at that point, and I had absolutely no idea, like none whatsoever. So we went home and
And you
we
guys
had
in that
some.
photo just probably looked so happy and excited.
Oh
Like I'm picturing a photo that Dylan and I have, a selfie of us just before we get wheeled in for the cesarean, and we just have the most natural, innocent smile and hopefulness and excitement that I don't know if we'll ever have that kind of innocence again. Like,
yeah, I don't think that I will ever have that look in my face again. I hope that I will be hopeful, but I know that it will always be a little bit tainted.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I find it so hard to look at that photo in particular. We were just so excited and so completely oblivious that
Mm-hmm.
anything was wrong. So yeah, we went home, and I remember I washed my hair and blow dried my hair because I was like, well, I'm going into labor. I don't know when my next shower is going to be, and I want to look nice. Like
Uh-huh.
once the baby's here, I want to have nice photos with him.
Literally.
Um, it's so stupid now, but yeah, it was really important to me in
Yep.
that moment. Um, so the day kind of progressed. I had a TENS machine that I had hired, and I put that on maybe at about lunchtime, because I think they say you should put it on pretty early. So I was like, okay, the contractions are starting to be pretty regular now. I'll put it on and get used to it. Um, and we called the hospital at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And they said, yeah, that all sounds good. It sounds like you're starting to be in labor. You've probably got like 8 or 10 hours in front of you. Just keep resting at home. Like, you don't need to do anything specific at the moment. Make sure you drink water because it's really hot today. So yeah, that was kind of it. We did that. We stayed at home for the rest of the afternoon. My my husband, bless him, he is an obsessive cleaner. So whenever he's stressed or anxious about something, he has to like clean everything. So I remember sitting on the sofa, or like on the floor next to the sofa, having my contractions, and he was like vacuuming around me. Um, and he was like, you know, our priorities are going to change when the baby is here. So I want the apartment to be as clean as it possibly can be. And I was like,
Course.
okay, you do you. It's something that he could do in that time
Yeah.
as well, like while I was having just mild contractions. So yeah, the day progressed and the contractions became more intense. They seemed to ramp up pretty quickly. We called the hospital again at about 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and by that point I was starting to not cope. I think I'd had maybe 2 Panadols. That's what the midwife on the phone had told us to do. I'd had 2 Panadols, but I was starting to get really, really uncomfortable. I tried to eat something because I remember we did a calm birth class beforehand, and I remember them saying in early labor, you need to keep hydrated, you need to keep like eating just little amounts. And I was trying to eat, but I was starting to vomit because the
The
pain was just
pain,
too
yeah.
much. Yeah, so we called the hospital and they were like, yeah, that sounds like it's progressing well. Just stay at home. And I was like, okay.
I'm in a lot of
Um,
pain here.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I still thought I had hours in front of me. Um, so we hung up from them, and I toughed it out for a little bit longer. And I think it was about 9 or 9:30. We called them again, and I said to Evan, like, I'm not coping anymore. I
Yeah.
think we need to go in.
You'd always
And he
planned
called.
to birth in the hospital?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. A hospital, like the hospital for me is a really safe place. And we live really close to the hospital as well. It's like a 10 or 15-minute drive.
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to do as much of the labor as I could at home. because I had heard that once you get into hospital, labor can sometimes stall, and we might be there for a while. So yeah, I was happy to do most of it at home. Um, but by that point, I was not coping. I was like, I need something. I need them to give me like the gas and air, or an epidural. Like, I was really open minded in that
Yeah.
regard. I
Yeah.
was like, I will do whatever it takes to get this baby out.
Mm.
Um, and so we called them again at 9 o'clock or something like that. And they were like, yeah, this is the third time you've called. So we usually invite women to come in now. And I was like, yep, definitely, we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and already at that point, I remember saying to the midwife on the phone, I think I've got the urge to push. And she was like, no, 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 like, no, no pushing. Just keep breathing and keep doing your breathing exercises to get through the contractions. If you feel like the baby's coming, call an ambulance, but no pushing. Just wait until you get here and we can check you out, because you're probably not fully dilated yet. And I was like, okay, I'll do my best.
Yeah.
So it took us a little while to get ourselves together. Like, I was contracting pretty heavily at that point. So I was planning in my head between contractions, okay, I need to get from the sofa to the bottom of the stairs, and then I can have a contraction. And then I need to get between the next two contractions, I need to get just up the stairs and I can have another one. And then I need to put my t-shirt on. So I was like trying to plan the way to the car, because yeah, it was progressing really quickly at that point. So by the time we left here, our apartment, I think it was 10 p.m. And even just walking from the door of our lift to the car, I had two contractions. Like, I had to stop and like hold on to something. So yeah, it was starting to get really intense, and I was getting that urge to push more and more. And so I'm like squeezing my legs
Oh.
closed, like, no, the midwife said, don't push, don't push. Um, and it was it was bucketing rain by this point, and Ev, bless him, he drove like an absolute maniac to the hospital. We had two different ways that we could have gone, depending on what time of the day it was, what the traffic was going to be like. And he decided to go a completely different way, like not planned at all. I think he got stuck at a set of traffic lights, but had a green arrow to turn left. So he just decided he was going to go that way. Um, and so we get to this entrance of the hospital that we'd never been to before.
Oh.
It's a really big hospital, and there's all these different ways you can go in. We get to this entrance, and because it's like 10 o'clock at night, it was closed,
Oh
of course.
no.
So there was like, I remember there was this boom gate like covering the entrance to the car park, and I was like, drive through it. Oh my God. And so he quickly reversed and went around another way into the hospital. And I was contracting so heavily. I was like, I think I'm going to have this baby in the car. Like, we were in the car for 20 minutes. And I was working so hard to keep my legs, like squeeze my legs together, basically. So anyway, we get to the hospital. He pulls up out the front, and it's absolutely bucketing with rain. And we get out of the car, and I'm like trying to hobble over to the entrance of the hospital. I had to stop a couple of times because I was contracting so heavily. We get up into the birth unit, and one of the midwives takes us into a delivery suite. And I remember that it was pretty quiet in the birth unit. And I remember the delivery suite she took us into, it was number 3. And I was like, oh, that's my lucky number. How cool. I was really excited about that. And we got into the delivery suite, and I remember breathing out this massive sigh of relief. I was like, okay, we're here, we
Yeah.
made it, I'm safe. I don't have to manage this on my own
Oh.
anymore. Like, I am giving control to them.
Yeah.
So yeah, we made it into this beautiful delivery suite. It was really lovely. They had all these fairy lights set up and all of these like affirmation cards on the walls. And I was contracting so heavily at that point that I couldn't. The midwife said to me, "Oh, just get up onto the bed and we'll see how dilated you are." And I couldn't even lift my leg up to get onto the bed. I was like standing next to the bed. I put my hands down and was kind of leaning over it, and I couldn't move. The contractions were just coming one on top of another. And I said, I can't. I'm really sorry, but I can't. And she was like, "Oh, that's okay. I'll just see how I'll check you out from here, basically." Um, so she put her hand on my belly so she could feel the contractions, and then she got the Doppler and was like feeling around to try and feel Rafi's heartbeat, and she couldn't find it. And she was like, "Oh, where do you usually hear it?" And I kind of pointed to the bottom left corner of my belly. I said, "Oh, it's usually here." And she was trying to find it and she couldn't. And she was like, "I'm just going to call for another set of hands because I think maybe the baby's like so far into the birth canal now that I'm having trouble finding his heartbeat." And I was like, "Okay, sure." In hindsight, that should have been the first inkling of something being wrong, because every scan or every appointment that I'd had with the midwives beforehand, they found his heartbeat straight away. Like, it was so strong and so clear. But because I was just in such advanced labor by that point, I couldn't even really think about it.
Yeah.
So she called for a more senior midwife, and she was like, "Just while I'm waiting for her to come in, I'm going to have a look and see how dilated you are, Karina." And she looked and she yelled out, "I've got a visual. You need to start pushing." And I was like, "What?" I thought that, I don't know, I thought that I still had ages to go.
And you've been told all of this time, like, don't push, don't push, don't push. Then all of a sudden it's like, gosh.
Yeah, she's like, "The baby's crowning. I can see the top of his head." And I was like, "Oh my God. Oh, okay." And at that point, the other midwife came in, and I remember I needed like a minute to just sort of collect myself because it was so unexpected. I thought she was going to say, "Oh, you're 4 centimeters dilated. We'll give you some drugs to be able to cope with the contractions." Um, so the midwife said, "All right, it's time to start pushing." And Evan was standing on the other side of the bed and looking at me and kind of holding me. And I did one push and his head was out, and the midwives, both of them were there kind of behind me. The midwives are like, "His head's out, he's coming." And I looked at Evan and I said, "Can you see him?" And Ev like nodded at me. And so I did one more big push, and Rafi just kind of slipped out. And the more senior midwife who had come in, she was right behind me, and she'd reached under between my legs, and she caught him. And I looked down and I was like, "Oh my God, that's my baby. Like, that is my baby. I made that." I couldn't, I could not believe it. And I was looking at him, and straight away, as soon as the midwife caught him, she yelled out, "Call a code." And I think that triggered something in me, because I was like, "Why isn't he crying?
Mm.
Why aren't his eyes open? Why isn't he crying?" And so they kind of whisked him away, sort of behind me. They took him over to the resuscitation table. I guess someone must have cut the cord at that point. I'm not exactly sure. And all of these people came into the room. There must have been like 10 people that came in. And they put Rafael onto the resuscitation table, and they started doing compressions. And I was still standing there on the side of the bed, and I think I was still saying, "Why isn't he crying? What's wrong? What's wrong?" And one of the midwives said to me, "It's all right, Karina. They're just going to work on him for a little bit. We need to focus on getting the placenta out now." And so they gave me the injection in the side of my leg to get the placenta out. That really hurt. Like, this is so dumb. Like, I had just given birth without any medication at all. And honestly, the thing that hurt the most was the injection in my thigh. I remember yelling out, "Oh, fuck." Sorry. And they were like, it's all right, Karina, we just got to get the placenta out. And so they managed to kind of lift me up and put me onto the bed. Meanwhile, that the whole medical team is still working on Rafi, and I can just hear them doing the compressions, 1 and 2 and 3, 1 and 2 and 3. And the placenta came out really easily. And more and more people were coming into the room at that point. And I could hear what they were doing, putting in adrenaline and putting all these different things into him. And Evan was on the side of the bed. I was lying in the bed. And Evan was on the side and he was like holding my face. He said, just look at me, just focus on me. And I was like, I can't. I need to see what's happening with my baby. And periodically someone would call out like, oh, it's been 9 minutes now. It's been 17 minutes now. And I realized that was how long they had been trying to resuscitate him. And the senior midwife came over to me. At that point, I was praying. I was like, please, God, please, Rafi, please. And the senior midwife came over to me and she sat next to the bed and she said, Karina, it looks like the baby might have passed away already. He's got some tearing on his skin that kind of indicates to us that he's already passed away. And I was like, no, that's not possible. I felt him move when I was in labor. I thought I felt him moving. And I remember being in labor at home and saying, I can't wait to meet you, Rafi. I can feel you moving around in there. I can't wait to hold you in my arms and feel you moving in my arms. And so I didn't really take the midwife seriously when she said that to me. I was like, no, that's not possible. That must be a mistake. And so, 22 or 23 minutes had passed at this point, and I was getting the shakes really badly. I was just like shaking in the bed, I think just from shock that it had all happened so quickly. And I remember the consultant, I think she was the neonatologist consultant, she came in and she was just wearing like jeans and a t-shirt and she had her handbag on her arm. So I don't know if she'd been called in or if she'd just left or something like that. And when she came in, the atmosphere in the room kind of changed. Like everyone deferred to her. And I could hear the team that was working on Rafi saying, all right, we're going to take him to the NICU. They thought that they found a very faint heartbeat at that point. So they said, all right, we're going to take him to the NICU, and I think they have better equipment in there to take stock of what kind of shape his heart was in. And someone said, someone tell mum and dad what's going on. And it's like we weren't even in the room. Like they were entirely focused on him, which I totally understand. But I remember hearing that and I yelled out, yes, tell mum and dad, update mum and dad what's going on. And so at that point they were like, yeah, we're going to transfer him over to the NICU. And Evan was still next to me and he was kind of looking between Raf and me. And I said, you have to go with him. You have to be with our boy. I can't. I need you to go with him. And he was like, but I don't want to leave you. I don't want to leave you like this. And I said, please go for both of us and be with him. So this whole procession of people took Rafi out of the room. He was still on the resuscitation table and they all kind of walked out. And all of a sudden it was just quiet in the room. It was me and one other midwife and that was it. And I was like, what the fuck is happening? Like, what is going on? And she was beautiful, bless her. She was really, I wouldn't say cheery, but she was like quite quiet and like, all right, Karina, this is what we need to do now. I'm going to like check you out to see if you need any stitches. And it was just so eerily quiet in that room after having 20 people in there. So yeah, she checked me out and she was like, no, I don't think you're going to need any stitches. I'll get the doctor to come in just to double check. And I think at one point she actually left. I think I remember being in the room by myself, which now that I look back at, I'm like, how is that okay? Maybe I imagined it. Maybe she was there and she was like doing something in a corner, but I remember feeling very much alone. And I don't know how long I was there for, but not long after that, the door to the room opened and Evan had come back, and the senior consultant who had come in late in her jeans and t-shirt, she was standing next to Evan. She had her hand on his shoulder, and he just looked at me and shook his head, and he just had tears running down his face. And he didn't even say anything. He just shook his head. And the consultant, I think she said, like, Karina, I'm so sorry. We did everything that we could. And I just couldn't take on that information. Like I couldn't actually process it. I think I said to her, "Oh, thank you," like something totally inappropriate. But I was in such shock from having such a quick labor and giving birth and all of this happening that I couldn't even actually understand what they were saying to me. And Ev came over and basically just collapsed on the bed next to me, sobbing, and I was holding him, and I was comforting him. I was like, "It's all right, Ev, it's all right." And yeah, I just couldn't actually understand what was happening right in front of me, like what was going on. Now that I look back on it, I think that was the worst moment, him coming in with this consultant and just shaking his head, and the look of like incomprehensible devastation on his face.
And that he had to tell you that, he had to come and deliver that news to you.
Yeah. And I found out afterwards that he was actually the one that had to tell them to stop. So they were working on Rafi for 30 minutes doing compressions and everything like that. And somewhere, I think around the 30-minute mark, they were like, "Look, this is what we've been doing. He's not showing any sign of life. We need your permission to stop. We can keep going, but we need your permission to stop." And Ev was the one that had to say, "Stop. And I don't know how he did that. I don't know. Yeah.
It's just so fucked. So fucked.
And I feel so stupid that I didn't know. Like, how could I not know that my baby had died inside me? Like
I was thinking before when you were saying it, like there is so much pressure on us as women to know. Like I said my whole pregnancy that I never felt Milli, and I felt like my intuition told me that. But at the same time, like count their kicks. How many did you have per hour?
Yeah.
Then what does a kick feel like for me? What does a kick feel like for you? Because that's what my OB would say, like what your normal is your normal. But what the fuck is normal? And then for you, you're like, well, I thought I felt Raf in labor. Like, but how would you know that you didn't? Because this is what I used to say as well. I'm like, they're like, what do you mean you don't feel her? I'm like, well, I can feel like a 3.5 kilo human inside of me. I know she's there, but I don't feel what I think kicks and punches should be. So of course you felt him because he was there.
This is exactly it. And I even remember saying to the midwife and the sonographer in my last couple of scans, when, they ask you, "Oh, you're still feeling the baby move normally?" I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I think he slowed down a little bit, but I guess he is running out of room in there." And they were like, "Yeah." And now I know that that's not true.
Good.
That's not correct at all. but yeah, apparently also once they have passed away, they do actually, because they're in the amniotic fluid, they still move from
Of
side to
course.
side. So that's what I thought was him like kicking and punching. And
Mm.
I had an anterior placenta, which I think it seems to be a common denominator amongst a lot of lost moms, that they also had anterior placentas. So I never felt massive movements from him anyway. And you know, when it's your first pregnancy, like you don't know
No.
what's normal, what's right. You don't want to, like, I didn't think that anything was wrong, but I also didn't want to, I don't know, I didn't want to be a burden
Yeah,
or
you don't
something
want to go
like that.
well, like similarly for the scan that you had at 30 weeks where the sonographer was like, "Oh, there's nothing wrong." So you don't want to continue going
Yeah.
back if you did like, "Oh, he has slowed down," which is,
Hmm.
not normal, not okay. They don't slow down. They don't, as much as I don't love my old OB for everything that happened, he does always talk about slowing down and change of movements is not normal. So,
Mm-hmm.
that is
Hmm.
a thing. But, you would have felt silly, like, I don't want to go in because what if there's something, what if it's all okay?
Exactly. Yeah. And there had never been any issue at all. So, yeah, I didn't really, yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I think that is going to haunt me for the rest of my life. Like my rational brain says that I couldn't have known, but then I also think like I am his mum and I was responsible for protecting him and for looking out for him. And I didn't know when something was fundamentally wrong. How could anyone else have known if I didn't know? And I just, that that is really hard. That's really hard. Um, yeah. So we at some point they brought him back into the delivery suite. My memory is like a little bit hazy from this point on. Um, but they brought Rafi back into the delivery suite. And we were there for a little bit longer, and then they moved us into a completely separate room. And I have to say, the hospital where I gave birth, the Royal Hospital for Women in Sydney, they were incredible. Like, I cannot speak highly enough about the care that we received in the days that we spent there after Rafi was born, but also like even now, almost 4 months on, the follow up and the care that I've received has been incredible. Um, so they moved us into this special room, like away from the rest of the maternity unit. We all, Evan was with me at that stage, so Ev, me, the midwife, and Rafi was in like one of those little hospital kind of trolley cot things. We all moved over into that room. And the midwives helped us give him a bath. Actually, they asked me, they said, "Do you want to bathe him? Do you want to put a nappy on him?" And I was like I couldn't even think. I didn't know what they were asking. I didn't know what to say. I just, like, it was like my brain had been switched off. And Ev was a little bit more cognizant than I was. And so he was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so they helped us give him a little bath. And that was the first time that I actually got to properly look at him as
Mm.
well. Like I saw his whole body, and we did his measurements and we weighed him. And he was long and lean. He was 56 centimeters, and 2.96 kilos. So like long and lean, which is my family to a T. Like my
Uh-huh.
dad and my sister are the lankiest people you'll ever see. So it was, I was like, yeah, that's my son for sure. Um, but yeah, they helped us give him a bath, and they were like, "Do you have an outfit to put on him?" And so we were doing all of these things, and I still just couldn't actually comprehend what was going
Yeah.
on. One of the midwives, she was so beautiful. She grabbed my phone or Evan's phone when we were doing all of this, and she just took some photos. Like, she didn't even ask, she just did them. And we've got all of these beautiful photos of that process of dressing him, of looking at his whole body,
I love that.
and putting the nappy on. And in those photos, like this was, I don't know, an hour or 2 hours after I had given birth. In those photos, I look so happy. Like I'm looking at Raf and I am so amazed that I created that little human. Um, and like Evan is sobbing, the midwives are crying, like everyone else in the photo is like so just looks absolutely devastated. And I I'm looking at Raf and I just look so proud and
Oh,
so
I
happy.
love that.
Um, yeah, I kind of do too.
Yeah, I
I
love
do too. Because even though he had already died, I was still meeting my baby for
Yeah.
the first
And you
time.
had created him, and your body, I know that you're so upset with yourself for not knowing, but like I was just chatting to the girl in the previous podcast, and she was like, went through this stage of being so angry at her body for failing
Mm,
her, and she's just passed 1 year since her baby passed, and she goes, I finally can look at myself and not hate my body for failing me. And I just think, we as mums need to be proud of what we do. You did create Rafi and he was perfect, and you have every reason to smile and be proud of that.
thank you. Yeah, I think my relationship with my body will be forever changed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I'm so proud of it for creating this beautiful human being, but then how could it let me down like this? Like, um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be a long, forever battle, I'm sure. It's
I think so. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I used
Yeah.
to always say that Millie's condition, like I at the beginning would say Millie created this genetic condition in her DNA, and then I was like, wait, she didn't fucking create it. I was like, Dylan and Mize,
Mm,
Dylan and I did, and then I'm like, wait, I don't want to put that blame on us either. Like
yeah.
it's such a
Yeah.
battle. It's such a battle.
Oh, it's so hard. Like even just saying that, it's such an understatement, right?
Yeah.
Like it uh, uh, I've really had to try and accept how far out of my control this has been. Like, I mean, I did pregnancy so well. Like I said, I loved it and I was so diligent. I followed all of I did all of the right things. I was
Yeah.
sleeping on my side.
Yeah.
I thought I was feeling him move. I mean, I was picking, you're not meant to eat bean sprouts in pregnancy. I was picking the bean sprouts out of my pad thai every time. Like, I did everything
Yeah,
and I did it perfectly, and it still wasn't enough. Yeah,
I
yeah,
agree.
that's a really hard thing to try and reconcile. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think because I had a very similar feeling, and I went to acupuncture a little while ago. You might have heard me mention this somewhere along the way, but I went to acupuncture and I said to the girl when I was doing IVF, I'm not taking the herbs and I'm like the medicines and the
Mm,
vitamins and all that. I said, because I did everything perfect with Millie and I still lost her. And she said, but maybe it's because you did everything perfect that you got 39 weeks and 6 days. And I was like,
mm,
ugh, you know,
wow.
if I did, like, because I was, I'd never put perfume on my skin once I was pregnant and all those things. So I was like, had I have put perfume on, had I have eaten the bean sprouts, had I have not taken the vitamins, maybe she wouldn't
Yeah.
have even made 39 weeks. So, you
Wow.
know,
That's such a good way of looking at it though. Like it reiterates that you did so many things right and you actively helped Millie get to where she was meant to be.
yeah.
I think that's really lovely.
And I share that because you did the same with Raf. Like
Yeah.
perhaps
Yeah.
doing all those things was why you were able to get 40 plus 6. It's easy
Yeah.
for us to
Yeah.
look at the other person and be like, yeah, you did that for Millie, but to be able to give ourselves kindness and say that same thing back
Mm,
to our own selves.
totally. Totally. It's so hard to treat yourself like a friend when this has happened. Yeah, because some of the things that I say to myself, I would never ever say to anyone that I care about, but somehow it's okay for me to say that to myself. But I just think of like how naive we were as well. And I know that you've said this and other guests on your podcast have said it as well. Like, we just never ever thought that stillbirth was a thing that could happen.
Yeah.
Like, I remember when we first started with the IVF, I thought the worst thing that could happen is that I would have an early miscarriage, and that would be awful and devastating. But the concept of stillbirth never even came into my mind. Even, when they give you all the pamphlets in your antenatal kits about sleeping on your side and counting the kicks, it just, yeah.
You
It's
literally
like
don't think
something
it's
that,
ever going to happen to you.
no, it's something that happens to other people or to people that don't have access to quality medical care or have other health conditions. It's so random. Yeah,
Literally.
yeah.
And so did you end up doing any testing afterwards of the placenta or an autopsy or anything like that?
Yeah, we did. So we got to spend actually about 5 days in hospital with Raf, which was really beautiful. Like, I will treasure that time forever. They took him, we consented to a partial autopsy. We didn't want them to touch his head, but I was happy for them to look at the rest of his body. So he went away for the autopsy. He was born on Saturday night. He went away for the autopsy on Tuesday or Monday afternoon, and then came back to us on Thursday afternoon. So it was really, really quick, which I've since heard other women's stories of their baby goes away somewhere, even interstate, for an autopsy to happen, and they don't come back for like weeks or even months, which is just horrendous. So yeah, we were lucky in that regard. The autopsy was happening on site at the hospital. And they looked at the placenta as well. And it was revealed that my placenta was very small. So it was small, and it also had some like patches of inflammation as well. So it wasn't like in great shape, I suppose. And also my cord was hypercoiled. It had like double the amount of coils that it should have had.
There's been a few of those. Have you seen some of the other episodes?
Yeah. I've heard that is a pretty common result or answer. I mean, it doesn't tell, you don't find out why it happened or how it happened. So that
I think that's one of the hardest things with placenta, because it's so hard for them to find any of these things on the ultrasound. Like, surely in this day and age, they can have better ultrasounds to find all of these things that are the problem. Like, and so had they have been like, could they have ever found that you had a small placenta? Is it not something they measure during an ultrasound?
Not really. So we were told that, like, obviously they look at the blood flow to and from the placenta in your ultrasounds, but we found out afterwards that the only way they can actually look at the placenta is by looking at the baby. They just look at how well the baby is growing and make an assessment of the placenta based on that. But we fall into this grey area where Rafi was growing well enough so that it masked this massive issue with the placenta, and it's only at the very end that his demands for nutrients and oxygen were too high and the placenta just couldn't keep up. But when they did the autopsy, they found that like some of his vital organs were half the size of what they should have been for a baby that was like 41 weeks gestation.
Oh no.
Yeah, so it's a real head spin actually, because when he was born, he was 2.96 kilos, which falls within the normal range. Like, it's on the lighter end.
It's lighter than,
I think. Yeah, Millie was 3 something.
3-4. Yeah.
Yeah. So both my sister and I were 2.95. So it wasn't, I didn't really think anything of it. And the doctor said to us, yeah, he's still within the normal range for a regular baby. But yeah, when they looked at his organs, it looks like they had been compromised from the start, potentially. Um, and because we didn't, the next question from there is, if I had been induced earlier, would he have survived? And because we also chose to not include his brain in the autopsy report, we don't know if his brain was also compromised by
Right.
this small placenta. So it's this impossible question of, would he have survived? If yes, what kind of quality of life would he have had? Would he have had some kind of disability, or would he have been absolutely fine?
Yeah.
I've worked myself into a spin going down all of these hypothetical paths, but
Yeah.
ultimately it's not going to change anything because he's not here.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a relief to get an answer from the autopsy. We had very much been prepped for the fact that at full term stillbirth, at full term stillbirths, it's unlikely, or it's less likely to get an answer. You're more likely to get an answer if the baby is born at 20 something weeks.
Really?
So we were, yeah. I don't exactly understand why.
I guess because if the baby can make it all the way till full term, there's probably generally not a reason for them to pass.
Yeah.
Because it would have been found way earlier, I guess.
Yeah. Whereas Rafi was an exception to that. He had been, it was a chronic thing. It wasn't an acute incident that happened just in the last week where the placenta detached or something like
And
that.
so
It had been happening for a while.
it didn't, besides the you had one midwife about 30 weeks in that said, I'm concerned about growth and movement. Other than that, you hadn't really had any concerns. So was it something that was missed on all the other scans? Did he normally measure well his organs and stuff?
So it wasn't missed because it wasn't even looked at, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So once you've had your 20-week morphology scan, they don't really look at the organs in that much detail. They, at the 20-week mark, they check to see that everything's there. And then after that, they kind of just look at their heart to see that it's beating. And it's a bit more basic than that. And because it was thought that Rafi had died when he was already in hospital, initially anyway, because they were trying to resuscitate him, there was, the hospital had to conduct this big risk assessment that was submitted to the Ministry of Health, because it was thought that a patient had died in their care in hospital unexpectedly. And so as part of that, they looked at all of my antenatal care. They went through every single scan, all of my midwife appointments, all of the notes, basically to check if someone had missed something. And that was our biggest fear, that there were obvious signs and they weren't picked up, or that, something was missed. And thankfully, the report came back and there was no sign that anything was wrong. Now, if I were to have a subsequent pregnancy, we would be looking for specific things.
Sure.
But because I was just a regular pregnancy, there was no indication of anything being wrong. They didn't know to look for certain things. So, yeah.
My word.
Which is a relief, because I would have been really, like, even more upset if there was a sign and someone missed it. But it shouldn't take a baby dying for them to say, okay, well, in your next pregnancy, you're going to have much closer monitoring and more regular
why aren't all
scans
of those things just checked anyway?
That's right. Yeah,
why
right.
aren't their organs measured more frequently, or why aren't, what we pay for all these things, or even if we don't, and it's a public system, like, why aren't all those things checked more?
Yeah.
Like it's literally life or death. And then it's also our mental health when our child dies. Like it is so, so, so detrimental to our well-being and society
Oh,
and every aspect of our lives. Like how is it not more cared for?
yeah. Yeah. Like I am fundamentally a completely different person since Rafi was born and passed away. I will never be the same again. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find any parent that hasn't had their entire worldview shifted,
Yeah.
any bereaved parent that hasn't had their entire worldview shifted because of something like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it was reassuring in the sense that there wasn't really a whole lot that could have been done under the model of care that I received
Yeah.
and the information that we had available at the time. Um, but it doesn't make it hurt any less, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you saying that reedifies to me that, there was nothing more that you could have done as a mum. You couldn't have known. And, even though you didn't know until he was born, there's nothing you could have done differently.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And I know that's hard to hear. I know you still will lay in bed every night with it. 10 months on, I still lay in bed last night and I still replay I just couldn't sleep last night, and I just wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, my brain just doesn't switch off ever. Like you're constantly reliving everything.
Yeah.
So I know that it doesn't change anything, but
Yeah. We're now trying to, I guess, adapt to life, figure out what we do now and how we live our lives without him.
yeah.
We were so lucky in that we got to spend all this time with him at the hospital. We had this room that was like far away from the maternity ward. The hospital said, you guys can stay here for as long as you want. You can stay here for 2 weeks if you really want to. So that was really helpful because all of a sudden something was in our control. Like we got to make the decision as to when he would go for the autopsy, when the funeral directors would come and take him. That helped us a lot, I think. And we got to, in the hospital, we got to introduce him to some of our family and friends. Like my parents came at 2:00 in the morning after he was born. And one of Evan's brothers and sister came the next day, and Ev's parents came as well. So we actually, we got to show him off a little bit. We had a beautiful social worker actually who helped us get hand and footprints. And she called heartfelt as well, and like they came on a Sunday morning at 11:00, not even 12 hours after Rafi had been born, they were there. So yeah, I'm so grateful for that time that we got to spend in the hospital.
And so you had a cuddle cot, did you? They had the cold cot?
Yeah, we did. So they set one up in that room as soon as we got in there, and we slept there. They had a double bed as well. Evan and I slept there the night after that he was born. We went to bed at like 3:00 in the morning, and the midwives were like, just try and rest a little bit. And I fell asleep really quickly. I think I was just so exhausted physically and mentally. And it wasn't until the next morning when we woke up, and I remember going over to the window and like opening the shutters, and I saw that it was like a new day, and all of a sudden all of the events from the night before came back to me, and that was the first time that it actually hit me that he had died. I think I had just been in such a state of shock the night before that it didn't hit me until the next morning. And I just lost it. Like I collapsed onto the floor. Ev came and sat next to me. I think I must have been like howling so loudly that a midwife came in from outside to check that I was okay. It just, yeah, something about seeing the new day, and it was it like the fact that it was a new day and that
Yeah.
we were entering a new day without him as well. It was, yeah, that was really hard.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so we got to spend all this time in this really beautiful room, and we had all of these doctors coming and going, geneticist and a whole bunch of different people to care for us and to care for him as well. And then we had a few days where Rafi went away for the autopsy, and we went home for a little bit. And I previously was not a very spontaneous person. My husband is much more spontaneous than I am, but it must have been like the day that we got home, like the Tuesday or something, or Wednesday even. And I was in the shower and I was like looking at my body, and I was so angry at how it was recovering so quickly. Like I'd had such an easy delivery. I didn't need any stitches. I had no tearing. I very firmly believe that that was a gift from Raf, that he made
Oh,
birth really easy on my body.
yeah.
Um, but at the time, I was so angry at it, and I wished that I had more physical scarring and more physical
Wow.
pain to match like my emotional state. And so yeah, I was in the shower, like just thinking about all of this, and I was like, I'm gonna get a tattoo. I want his name on my wrist
Uh,
now.
uh-huh.
Um, and like I don't have any other tattoos. I've never particularly wanted one before. Ev's got a couple, but I've never really, there was nothing that I really wanted to get. And so I got out of the shower and I said, Ev, I'm getting a tattoo. And he's like, oh, well, I am too then. Let's go. And we literally went the next day, and we both got Rafael tattooed on
Oh,
our
I
wrists.
love that.
Um, and it's the best. Like yeah, I really like having a physical, tangible
Yes.
reminder of him on my body,
Yeah.
because it felt like my body forgot him so quickly.
Wow.
But it was kind of cool, because then when he came back from the autopsy and we got to see him one last time on the Friday, we could like kind of show him our
Oh, I
tattoo.
love that. I love that. And it's
Yeah.
interesting you say about like the body healing, because I know when your belly goes away, it's like, hold on, I just miss being pregnant again, especially because you loved it so much. It's like, well, the people out in the street on the like in the world don't know that I was just pregnant. Like no one
Yes.
knows, and like you just want to
Yeah.
scream at people like, my baby died, I have a baby. Don't you know what's happened to me? And so I can only
Yeah.
imagine with a vaginal birth, like you've got
Nothing.
nothing to show, essentially, where I
Yeah.
remember when we went over to Mexico in October, I was like, I said to Dylan, I'm trying to sunbake with my cesarean scar out just so that I could show it off. Like, look what I did for my child.
Yes. Yes.
It's,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, and I feel like the cesarean was such a walk in the park to heal from, whether that was
Mm.
because grief was just so overpowering. And it's like, well, at least I have that to compensate.
Mm.
And no one can ever feel the actual pain of your heart. Like the pain that we have in our heart is so fucking heavy, like it's indescribable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's a good point that you make though, because one of the things that I've struggled with most in this grief process is grieving the identity that I longed for as a mum, like going out into the world. I don't look like a mum. Other people don't see me as a mum.
Yeah.
Um, like I know that I am, and the people close to me know that I am too, but it's, I can't really perform that in society,
Mhm.
in the outside world. And I struggle with that so much, like so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm part of a support group now, and all the other mums in the group talk about how they all have other children, like older children, and they talk about how their kids helped them get through or get by in that period of grief, and how they were kind of like a distraction and they gave them a sense of purpose. And it makes me feel so lonely because I don't have that.
Yeah.
Like Rafi was meant to be that. And yeah, I looking at my life from the outside, I don't look like a mum, and now I don't tangibly do anything really that different either.
Yeah.
That is so hard.
Yeah. I so feel that pain. Like I feel that. And I remember when we went back home and everyone's like, does it feel weird to be home? And I'm like, it just feels like normal, which I hated. I
Yeah.
was like, was I ever pregnant? Like, did that ever happen? Because our home is just exactly the same. It feels emptier, but it's not. It's exactly as it was. And it's just like, for a long time, like Dylan and I would be like, it felt like it just never happened. And
Yeah.
then when
Yeah.
we were in New Zealand in February, and there was this like beautiful couple sitting next to us, and they had 2 little kids, maybe like 2 and 4. And, it was really cute, and they kept smiling at us. And it wasn't until we got in the car and I said to Dylan, I'm going to cry. And I just had to pull the car over and I started sobbing. And I said, we look at them and they look like a mum and dad with 2 kids, but then they look at us and they don't know that we have a baby. And I said, I hate
Yeah.
that. I hate that they're just looking at us thinking we're just some young couple that are just
Yeah.
living their best life, but we're actually living the
Yeah.
worst life ever. Like, I just said Millie should have been with us in a fucking carrier, in a pram. We could have, like I said, we would have had a conversation with that couple if we had Millie on us.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it's almost like you're losing friendships or connections that you would have had if they knew you had a child.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the biggest triggers for me actually is like when I go out to like a shopping center or anywhere really, and you see a mum with a child, and if it's like a busy sort of public space, often other older women in particular will talk to that mum. Like if the toddler is having a tantrum or something, an older woman will walk past and say, "Oh, I remember when my kids were that age," or "Have you tried X, Y, and Z?" And I like they're complete strangers and they'll never see each other again. And I so desperately want to be that mum and want people to notice me as a mum as well. And I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it's so cruel.
Yeah. I know. And then you feel so crazy because you're just like, I just want to tell them, like, I have a baby and I'm a mom,
Yeah.
and why don't they want to
I'm a
talk to
mum too.
me? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not just this
Yeah.
average fucking girl that has no baby. Like, I've been through I'm not saying that if you don't have kids you're average, but if you
Yeah. Yeah.
what we
Totally.
And I was only saying it to someone the other week. I said, like, you feel ripped off because my body has just been through so much to fall pregnant, to be pregnant, to birth a child. And then you don't have your prize, you don't have your baby, you don't have the thing that you can be like, look what I created. But it's like you just have to go through it in silence. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. You still have to go through all of the postpartum stuff as well as the grief stuff.
Absolutely.
Without them, it's the worst thing I think that could ever happen to a human being.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is, absolutely. And like it is the most, it says it at the beginning of this podcast, the most extreme form of bereavement is parental bereavement. Like nothing will, like it just is. It just is.
Yeah.
Goodness me. Oh. I love that we get to cry together.
I've just like stopped wearing makeup completely. I think I've worn makeup once in the last 4 months because I just cry it all off.
Yeah, I don't know why I bothered today. And so I have to ask, your other little embryos, you've got 2 there waiting.
Yeah, we are probably going to try again pretty soon. Frankly, that is the thing that is keeping me going at the moment. I have to be physically and mentally well enough to be able to do another embryo transfer. we asked all of our doctors, I asked everyone, like, how soon could we do it? And they were like, look, as soon as your period comes back, you're good to go. Um, so yeah, I both of us really want to go again quickly, and it's so complicated, but I'm also so hopeful, and knowing that those two little embryos in the freezer have the same DNA as Raf.
Yeah.
I think that if we are lucky enough to have another child, they will bring us closer to him
Yeah.
as well. They will, I mean, they will be his sibling.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we're preparing for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and accepting the fact that the fact that we've suffered so much already doesn't give us any protection or any ability for next time. We have the same statistics as anyone else.
See, I
Which seems
keep saying lightning doesn't strike twice, but I really should stop saying that. I'm just like, come on, surely we've had enough. Like,
I
no.
know,
But
I know.
I as well as anyone know that I hear stories that I should know better than to think that. But you just like, I'm like, I just have to think hopefully. Like, I just then I also, like, even without IVF at the moment, I'm like, I am so hopeful. Like, I am setting myself up for a big fucking fall if it doesn't work. But like, I'm just yearning for it, and Dylan's yearning for it. Like, the way we're talking at home, like, we didn't go buy pre-workout yesterday because I was like, I won't be able to have it soon. I'll be pregnant. Like,
Yeah, good one.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you have to be hopeful, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to exist. You wouldn't be able to survive.
Yeah.
Like, this is giving me such a sense of purpose now. I am terrified to think about what happens if it doesn't work. Yeah, definitely. But my counselor actually gave me some really good advice. She's like, as long as the anxious thoughts are balanced with the good thoughts, like as long as you're about 50-50, then that's okay. Once the anxious thoughts are like 70 or 80% for multiple days in a row, then we need to start think about doing something differently. But it's a minefield, and we haven't even started yet.
Literally. Well, please keep me posted. I would just love, I'm so invested now in your journey and in Raf's siblings and all the things.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we're hopeful more than anything else, and we're going back to that cautiously optimistic
Yeah, I liked that. I
mindset.
wrote that
Yeah.
down. Cautiously optimistic. I'm going to write it on my fridge when I get home, I think.
I am going to put it on a post-it note and like stick it on my forehead or something like that, honestly. Yeah. But one thing that I've learned in all of this is that you can feel such conflicting things at the same time. Like, even though you are terrified beyond belief, you are also hopeful, and you dare to allow yourself to imagine what it might be like. And that you don't just have to feel one thing at a time. Like, it all comes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing with grief, right? Where it's something we have to learn, because in the beginning you're like, I'll never feel happiness again. But
Totally.
you can have both. And sometimes it's silently, there's some days where we might cry a lot, and then there's other days where we don't cry, but not crying doesn't mean we didn't miss them anymore or any less that day. Like, I think it's just, they will forever be etched into our soul forever.
Yeah.
And I think how lucky are we that we just get to carry them within ourselves forever. I think we're so lucky.
And we have these beautiful little lucky charms that are with us wherever we go. And when we do eventually pass away ourselves, they'll be waiting for us on the other side. It's made me so now unafraid of death.
Me too.
I've never ever felt like this before, but I'm so just accepting of the fact that yes, I will go, and I'll get to see my boy on the other side. Like,
normally when you fly, like, I think most people have like rituals they do, and I always like feel for the bloody whatever the thing is underneath your seat and life vest or whatever. And since Millie, I'm like, oh well, plane crashes, at least I'll be with Millie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's my time. Oh, well.
I know. And people that haven't experienced this, I think, would be thinking, man, these ladies have lost the plot. But I think it's so normal
Totally.
for
Yeah.
us in this world to be not afraid of death anymore. And maybe for
Yeah.
you and I, it's different because we don't have other kids, and those with kids are like, well, we've got other things to live for, and not that you and I don't, but I think it's definitely a different ball game. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have as much to lose in terms of other people, I suppose,
Yeah.
who are dependent on us.
Yeah.
But it's it's funny you say that, because if you told anyone else outside of this community, like, people would think that you are suicidal. And I mean, sure, in the early days, there's certainly, well, for me anyway, there's certainly those dark feelings,
Absolutely.
but it's now it's not necessarily that I'm suicidal. It's that I can't wait to be with him again. You know,
Yeah.
it's not that I don't want to live. It's that I want to be with him,
Yes.
with unfortunately two different things
Yeah.
at the moment.
Yeah. I absolutely used to have the same conversations with my psychologist. I'm not suicidal today, but I just want to be in heaven with her, you know, and I'm happy to wait to get there, but also, you know, so I totally get where you're at, and I love that. And I feel like that will resonate with a lot of people. Oh, my lovely. It has been so good to have you on. It's been
Oh, thank you. I honestly, I have to say thank you. Like, this platform for sharing, I have benefited so much from listening to other people's stories. Thank you for creating this opportunity for people to share, but also for people to take comfort in other people's stories. It's really, really important. So thank you.
Thank you. That's really nice. I know everyone says it, but it's just like sometimes it just gets me because I'm like, people always ask, like, what is the impact on you? And I'm like, it's huge, but I love it so much. Like, I too get comfort from you guys, and you know, it makes me not feel so alone. And then I know it's the same for you, and then I know it's the same for people that listen and people that are being educated. So thank you for being brave and coming on and sharing your story and trusting me.
Oh, I won't say it's my pleasure, because I wish that neither of us were here, but I am grateful for the opportunity to share Rafi's story and to get his name out there in the world and continue his legacy as well. And I think that, Millie would be so proud of you. I think this is a beautiful thing that you are doing in her name and for her legacy.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I think that Rafi and Millie are having a little dance in heaven right now. Like, look at
I
that.
hope so.
Well, I'm very invested. Keep me posted on Rafi's little siblings, and thank you again for sharing.
Thanks so much, Rochelle.
Thanks, Karina. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Little Life, Big Loss. If you are here because you've experienced baby loss recently or a long time ago, I am so sorry. If you have never experienced the loss of a baby, but you are here to learn, thank you. If you are here because you have just had the news that you have to make some really tough decisions, I am so sorry. I hope these podcasts give you the help and the guidance that you need. If any of today's conversation has triggered any uneasy emotions for you, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or lifeline.org. Another organisation working specifically with pre- and postnatal depression and anxiety is PANDA, PANDA. You can find them at panda.org.au. And remember that postnatal depression and anxiety does not discriminate. It can affect both men and women, mums and dads. Please seek help from your GP, psychologist, your local hospital, a midwife, OB, Lifeline, or PANDA. I love you and I miss you, my Millie.